in version 2, there's a new splash screen when the program launches that includes some radio buttons for the type of project that you want to analyze. So as you see here, there's a standard, a Building America project type, and what's called a California Utility Cost Test. And in the upcoming bug release, there will be a couple more radio buttons here, another column of radio buttons where you can specify whether you want to do new construction project or a existing home retrofit analysis project. The idea of putting these radio buttons on the launch screen is that historically BEopt has been a kind of multi-purpose tool that if you know how to operate BEopt and make various settings on the input screens, you could get BEopt to do Building America type analysis, which has some built-in assumptions with regard to reference buildings and operating conditions, etc. Or if you knew what you were doing, you could change the reference building to something different. And then with this, some new capabilities for these California utility cost tests, and these are DSM cost effectiveness tests, the kind of standard ones that are used. They're actually used throughout the country, but only for California because they require some detailed information about avoided cost for utility power that we have available for California. We had funding from the California Public Utility Commission to implement these. In the future, we may be able to do similar DSM cost tests for other states, but right now they're specific to California. So again, the idea with these radio buttons and the new construction retrofit radio buttons is to be able to launch the BEopt software in the mode that you are interested in using it for a particular project. So Scott's going to describe that in more detail, and I'm going to turn things over to him. Oh, I should mention that during today's webinar, we will actually, Scott, maybe you could, if you wanted to go back to the PowerPoint, just to mention that we will have
not listed here.
We'll have questions and answers at intermediate points throughout today's presentation, so not just at the end. So if you have questions as we go along, please make a note of your question, and we definitely encourage you to, once we go into Q&A mode, and we'll be turning this over to our webinar facilitator, Erin, and she will ask for questions at that point. And it would be great if you're prepared to speak up at that point with Q&A, and we'll do that several times during today's webinar. Okay, Scott?
Okay, thanks, Craig. So, like Craig mentioned, these different project types here present you with an interface tailored for that type of analysis. There is additional information in the help file, the BEopt help file, that describes exactly what changes in the interface when you use one of these project types. For this demonstration, I'm going to stick with the standard project type, which has full flexibility and isn't really tailored for any specific analysis. Before we go too far into this, one thing I want to mention up front is you may be familiar with the previous versions of BEopt, where we had an Energy Plus specific version and a DOE2 specific version. In BEopt version 2, one thing we tried to do is streamline this as much as possible to allow having a single install and single interface where you can choose between the simulation engines in one program. So under the Tools and Settings menu, there is a Simulation Engines tab, and this is where you can choose to enable and specify the location of the different simulation engines, as well as which one you want to use for new projects when you start new projects in BEopt. There's also a little link here that if you click on it, it'll tell you some of the technologies that are specific to one simulation engine or the other. So those are technologies that will show up or not in the interface depending on which simulation engine you're using. So I currently have both enabled here. One thing this also allows us to do is facilitate comparisons between the different simulation engines. Energy Plus we tend to think of as a more capable simulation engine, but slower, whereas Do2 is a much faster simulation engine, but has less capability. And so we have made use of this comparison between simulation engines to run tens of thousands of simulations in our what we call some test suites, and we do some automated comparisons of results in different climates for different building types across all the different technologies in BEopt, and try to identify and reconcile any differences and work with the development teams of the different simulation engines to get issues resolved. And we've identified and resolved quite a few issues in that way. So BEopt version 2 has the ability to choose multiple simulation engines. You can see here in the interface that there's a drop-down where you could then switch between the different simulation engines on a case-by-case basis. So in addition to having the ability to have multiple simulation engines in the same interface, the other improvement we made is on the speed side of things. In the previous version of BEopt, the Do2 path was actually Do2 supplemented with Transys, the Transys simulation engine for hot water and PV simulation. Whereas in version 2, we've actually dropped Transys and we do both hot water and PV simulation in Do2 itself, which means that we're running less simulations, and Transys is actually a much slower simulation than Do2. So we gained some speed improvements there on the Do2 side. And then in addition to that, we have the ability to run on multiple processors on your local machine if you have a multiple processor machine. BEopt will default to 1 minus, or sort of the number of processors on your machine minus 1. So I've got a 4 processor machine. So BEopt actually defaults to 3 processors just to leave you with an extra processor for doing other stuff if you want. So that'll run simulations in parallel. And again, you'll see quite a bit of speed improvement if you've got a multiple processor machine, particularly for, let's say, parametric and optimization mode. Okay, so let me just draw a building here. So the geometry input screen is fairly similar to the BEopt version 1 geometry screen. And in fact, in general, we've tried to keep BEopt version 2 as close to BEopt version 1 interface as possible, except for places where there were obvious improvements we can make, or simplification to the interface, or allowing the user to make customization, additional customization in version 2. But we tried not to deviate too far from what we had in version 1. We thought that was a pretty good structure to the interface. We've gotten good feedback on the structure that we had. And so the geometry input screen is largely unchanged relative